Could Francisco Lindor win the MVP this season? I actually think it's possible, and I'll explain why on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find out my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment matter more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Now, we continue our season preview episodes looking at each player on the Mets roster today. Whole show based on Francisco Lindor, because I really do believe he is primed for a career year in 2023. What would a career year look like for Lindor? Well, let's look at what his best season has been as a big leaguer. You have to go back to 2018. He hit 277, 352 on base, 519 slugging. He had 38 home runs. He scored 129. He drove in 92. He swiped 25 bases, a 132 WRC plus. That measures hitters based on a league average of 100, so he was 32% better than your league average hitter. A great glove over at shortstop, a 7.8 F4, best year he's ever had. Last year was his second best season. A 270 average, a 339 on base, a 449 slugging. We saw 26 home runs, 98 runs scored, 107 RBIs, a career high, 16 stolen bases, a 127 WRC plus, and a 6.8 F4. When we look at what the projection models have for Lindor in this upcoming season, it's basically last year with a slight tick back, which is, the projection model is basically saying he performed at a level that isn't quite sustainable, but he will continue to be really good. So you look at the average between 248 and 255. Now last year he hit 270, so they're taking that off the table. He can't do that again. I don't necessarily buy that. You go to the on-base percentage between 321 and 328. Again, a tick back from last year at 339. Could he get on base at that same clip again? I believe so, if not a little bit better. Again, in his career year, he got that on base percentage over 350. I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility. The slug between 422 and 440. Last year was 449. Now, granted, 2021, it was a 412 slugging percentage, but you also look at a season where he was dreadful for the first couple months of the year before finally hitting 5 home runs in June and starting to turn it on a little bit before he got injured. I look at that season and I don't take much away from what we saw, and he still got to 20 home runs. So do we think he's not going to hit 26 again and he's going to slug even less? I don't necessarily buy that. I think he still has it in him to slug over 450. Last year was at 449. I think he could get even a little bit more pop in his bat this season. WRC plus between 114 and 121. That's based, on the career norms, right? His career WRC plus is 118, but last year was 127. Again, his career year is 132. I think he has it in him to get it over 130 again. The F4 between 4.3 and 5.9. So you look at his 2021 campaign, he had a 4.2 F4 season. Again, for those of you who aren't aware what F4 is, it's Fangraphs wins above replacement. So how many wins is he adding to your ball club? Last year, it was 6.8. This year, we'll see. All the projection models, the most they're giving him is a 6.1 F4, so a slight tick back. But he's going into age 29, and I don't see any reason why we can't see the best season of Francisco Lindor's career. Here's everything I see that's going for him entering this season. For one, he just played 161 games, so he has that in his memory bank now. He made it through a full season in a Mets uniform with all the pressures of playing in New York City. He handled them with grace. He put up a great campaign, and he also dealt with a bad finger injury last year that was self-inflicted from a hotel door. You remove that, I honestly believe he hits 30 home runs last year. So you take every single thing that he did and you just turn it up another notch. Let's just say instead of hitting 270, maybe he hits 280. Instead of having a 339 on base percentage, he has a 350 on base percentage. Instead of a 449 slugging, maybe it's a 475 slugging. Instead of a 127 WRC plus, maybe it's 136. Maybe instead of a 6.8 F4, it's a 7.5 F4. I think that there's still a little bit more left in the tank here to now go into his absolute physical prime. He was in it last year, but he still remains in it. Age 29 season on a team where you have Jeff McNeil and Brandon Nimmo and Starling Marte getting on base in front of him, depending on the day, depending on the lineup machination. You have the protection of Pete Alonso behind you. That's always going to allow Francisco Lindor to get more pitches to hit. I don't think he's going to vacate that 3 spot, even if, personally, I think the Mets' best lineup is putting Jeff McNeil in the 3 hole. I don't see that happening here. I think that they'll probably roll with either the same lineup from last year with Starling Marte batting second with Nimmo atop, or maybe they'll put McNeil in the 2 hole and they'll put Marte behind Alonso. Personally, I think it ends up being that case where Jeff McNeil gets moved all around the lineup again because he has that flexibility, and maybe his primary spot is 5th. But then again, you got Vogelback too, who just showed up to camp today on Sunday as I'm recording this, looking very in shape. So, again, we don't know exactly what the order looks like, but I find it hard to believe that Buck Showalter would move, the guy that I think he views as the captain of this team, the shortstop, someone who's a little bit more old school in Buck, who probably likes to see that particular type of hitter sit in that 3 hole. I think we're going to see that again. I think he's going to have Alonso behind him again. He's going to have runners in front of him again. So I believe he can drive in the same amount of runs, if not a little bit more, if everything breaks right. 107 is a tough bar to pass, but you never know if this team's a little bit better. Lindor could be a little bit better, but I think the home runs are going to play. And then the one thing that we could talk about a little bit more as it relates to his MVP case is the defense. I think the defense is going to lead to an incredibly impressive F-WAR at the end of the season. And a lot of times in MVP races, we look at who was the most valuable player based on FanGraphs wins above replacement. That's the guy that generally takes home the award. Just ask Aaron Judge. And if I'm not mistaken, Paul Goldschmidt, if not the leader last year in the NL, I think he was pretty close. I have to check that. But before we get into more of this and we start discussing MVP, the place you should go if you want to bet on the MVP is also the sponsor of today's show, and that is FanDuel. This past weekend was the NBA All-Star break. Got a little bit of time off still after we come out of the weekend, but you still have that remaining second half of the season into a stretch run of the playoffs. That is why it is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to three-pointers drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. Personally, I have my eyes toward MLB futures already. I've told you to hop on Kodai Senga when it comes to the Rookie of the Year at plus 750. The next segment here, we're going to be diving into Francisco Lindor's MVP case, and his odds are so long, you might as well sprinkle a little bit of money on that because it could pay off in a big way if Lindor has the season I expect him to this year. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/on to learn more. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Looking over the early MVP odds at FanDuel for the National League, you got Juan Soto at plus 550. You got Mookie Betts at plus 850. You got Paul Goldschmidt to repeat at plus 950. Ronald Acuna Jr. plus 1,000. Fernando Tatis Jr. plus 1,000. Nolan Arenado and Manny Machado, both plus 1,000. Beyond that, Trey Turner, plus 1,200. Freddie Freeman, plus 1,300. Pete Alonso, plus 1,400. Austin Riley, plus 1,600. Matt Olson, plus 2,400. All the way down, we have Francisco Lindor at plus 2,500. The longest odds out of all of that group. And if I really was to go through my personal sort of likelihood of an MVP season from these guys, I can see Soto and Betts. Goldschmidt, I don't think that he's going to repeat, but I understand why he has better odds than Lindor. Acuna, definitely can see it. Tatis could see it for sure. Arenado and Machado, yes. I stopped short of there. I mean, maybe I like Freddie Freeman a little more to win the MVP. I don't think Trey Turner wins it. I think he has to have an MVP type season for the Phillies to win this division or even win 95 games, but I don't know if I see that. Austin Riley, okay, maybe. Matt Olson, I don't think so. The bottom line, though, is you're looking at your odds. If you're a Mets fan that wants to bet on the MVP, and you're seeing Pete Alonso at plus 1,400 and Lindor at plus 2,500, but, I mean, last year, Francisco Lindor was worth over 2 more wins than Pete, and the defense does matter. I mean, Pete Alonso could go out this season, hit 55 home runs, drive in 145, and yeah, he might win the MVP, but he has to do that insane amount of production on the offensive side to make it happen. Francisco Lindor, if he's just slightly better, if he's just 32 homers instead of 26 and 110 RBIs instead of 107, if he scores over 100 instead of being in the 90s like he was last year, if he hits 280 instead of 270, gets on base instead of 350 clip, and that WRC plus is slightly better, and then you eliminate the shift, right? This is the big one to me. You take that shift out of play. That's going to make Lindor's defense not only with the metrics stand out, but the eye test is going to pop so much more. Lindor is going to be able to flash his range more. He's going to be making plays that few shortstops in the game can actually make. And with that, on a team that, to me, looks like a potential juggernaut. I mean, I know that's the Mets guy getting hyped about the Mets this season, and everyone's like, they didn't do enough. What are we talking about if we look up and down this roster, if we look at the transactions? If you get, and I keep coming back to this, 54 starts this year from Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer, a third of your games started by those future first ballot Hall of Famers, the Mets can go out and win 40 of those games. That's how good those guys are. If you do that, and then you look at the rest of your schedule, and you were to just play 500 baseball in the other pockets of 54 games, what does that leave you with? A 94-win season on the low end? I think they can be better than that in those other starts. When you have a Senga, when you have a Quintana, when you have a Carrasco, when you have a Peterson on the mound, when you have a bullpen that has 5 guys you can trust. So if the Mets are going out, and let's say they're the Dodgers of last year, what if the Mets go out and win 110 this year? What if they win more games than the 1986 Mets? And Francisco Lindor is the starting shortstop, hitting over 30 homers, winning a Gold Glove, and putting up an F4 over 8. I'll tell you, this week for Just Baseball, we are ranking our top 10 shortstops, and it was consensus among the staff that Francisco Lindor was the best shortstop in baseball. So I'm going to be getting into a lot of that on this show on Who's Better this week, where, my new show, Who's Better Baseball, I compare players at times. So I'll be comparing Trey Turner and Lindor. And the reason why I think Lindor is not only the better player, but the player that has a better chance of winning the MVP this year compared to Turner is because I think Trey Turner's ceiling is maybe like a 7-win player. His absolute ceiling, it's probably more like a 6.5-win player. That's because I think he's a more consistent offensive player, but I don't think that his offensive ceiling is that much better than what Lindor's offensive ceiling is, and his defensive ceiling is capped. Whereas Lindor, his defensive ceiling is the best overall defender, a platinum glove winner. That is his ceiling defensively. So if he puts it all together this year in a Mets uniform, yeah, I could see him, having one of those years where he puts up an 8.3 F WAR and it's the top mark in the National League, the Mets are the best team in the National League. And come season's end, you're going to be like, I can't believe I didn't take Ryan's advice all the way back in February when I could have bet on Francisco Lindor at FanDuel at plus 2,500, because that bet's going to pay off a pretty penny, even if I'd only thrown $10 on it. That's where I think we're at with Lindor. And I also think that when you consider the World Baseball Classic, I think he's going to get off to a torrid start this year. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a minute. First, though, I know personally this is the time of year where a lot of us are still building off those New Year's resolutions, trying to lose weight. And if you're looking to be healthier, Built Bar is the answer. You got to try them because, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. So you're looking at a protein bar that honestly tastes like a candy bar with flavors like churro, the peanut butter brownie, the coconut almond. So many to choose from, only coming with 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, while getting a whopping 17 grams of protein. Also now, you don't have to wait, because in the past, I told you to go to Built.com. You still can. You go there, get your mixed box, change up the flavors that are available. But if you want to find Built Bars in the stores, you can now go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of the cookies and cream, or the double chocolate, or the coconut puffs. Or if you're closer to a Sam's Club, head in there, grab a 13-bar box of their hit flavors, the brownie batter or the churro. You can thank me later. Go to Built.com today, or go to your local store to try Built Bars. Now, some might make the argument that the World Baseball Classic is not an ideal place to get ready for a season. I do not agree with that whatsoever. Francisco Lindor doesn't agree with that. When he met with the media at spring training, he said it's amazing to go out and you're playing Game 7 baseball every day. He loves repping Puerto Rico on his chest. And I really believe that playing in that type of competitive environment and then going to Game 1 of a 162-game season, there's probably a slight tick down once you get past opening day when it comes to intensity of game. But I think when you have the clarity of purpose this Mets team has, I think you can build off that, and you can take that adrenaline and that fire you play with in those WBC games, and you can translate it right back into the regular season and get off to a fast start. You look at his season in 2017. Francisco Lindor, debuts in 2015, plays 99 games. 2016, he plays 158 and then goes on a run to the World Series. And then right after that, or not, I guess necessarily right after that, but a couple months later, he's starring in the World Baseball Classic. Then the following season, 2017, right after the tournament, plays 159 games. His home run total jumped from 15 the year prior all the way up to 33. He hit 273, 337 on base, 505 slugging. First time in his career, he got that slug over 500. He put up a 6.1 F4 season. The following year was his career year. Looking at the breakdown of his season, though, is fascinating to me, because what did Lindor do coming right off the tournament in March and April? He hit 309, 380 on base, 638 slugging, an OPS over 1,000. His weighted runs created plus was 156, so 56% better than your league average hitter. He walked 11% of the time. He only struck out 14.7, so that is an incredible mark as well. And you look at the home run power, Lindor coming off a season again where he hit 15 home runs in the first month coming off a tournament. What did Lindor do? He hit 7 bombs, scored 20, drove in 17. Francisco Lindor was awesome after the tournament that year. Now, what happened after that? He did hit 5 home runs in May, but then went in the tank a little bit in June and July, only 2 home runs apiece. And his numbers, as far as his WRC plus, his on base percentage, his average, all that stuff, they took a tick down. May, 245, average, 314 on base, 451 slugging. WRC plus was 98, so he was just slightly below league average hitter. Then he had a dreadful June where he hit 214, 261 on base, 339 slugging, a 51 WRC plus. Lindor said in his press conference talking to the media at spring training that it was exhausting to play in the World Baseball Classic. At that time, you're looking at an athlete that was 23 years old, coming off playing 158 games plus all those games in the playoffs. I think that his body was nowhere near as mature and ready at that time. Look at Francisco Lindor in the World Baseball Classic last time, and then look at him again when he's playing this time. You're going to see a much more filled out athlete, a guy with a much more mature body, someone who has spent, all of this time as a professional crafting himself, getting his routine down, getting himself to a point where he could be this level of an athlete. Francisco Lindor, maybe based on raw just youth and exuberance, was, I guess, maybe more athletic in the sense that maybe he was a bit quicker back then. But as a complete, fully formed baseball player, Lindor is way more polished and way more experienced now to manage his energy level going from that tournament into a season where I think he can still have that, the intensity that goes from the tournament to the season where he can jump off to that fast start. But I think he'll have way more in the gas tank to sustain it and to fuel himself and to not go into the dumps in June. And if Francisco Lindor doesn't slam his finger into a door and he goes into this season and he has a completely healthy campaign coming off the excitement of the World Baseball Classic, met with the expectations as a team and with his contract of delivering, I think you're going to see the best season of Francisco Lindor's career. And also to help him a little bit further, his mentor is part of the organization, Carlos Beltran, the guy that helped him overcome his adversity in a Mets uniform in the beginning, because Beltran did the exact same thing his first year back in 2005. And then his next year, 2006, he had a season very similar to the one Lindor just had in 2022. And Beltran continued to be great for the remainder, really, of that 7-year contract. So I expect Francisco Lindor to go out and to ball out this year. I think he is going to be a top 5 MVP finisher. I'm not saying he's guaranteed to win it, but I think he's the best bet right now at those odds you're getting. And I think that he will once again prove, if nothing else, that he is, bar none, the best shortstop in Major League Baseball. Anyway, though, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Tomorrow's show, a little bit different. Going to look at the underrated names at camp. We already did that, but we did not discuss in depth the minor league signings. What minor league signings could actually make this roster? Tommy Hunter is one of them, but there's a lot more to dive into, so we'll get to that. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show, at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, now for your second listen. Check out Locked On MLB Prospects, hosted by Lindsey Crosby. Locked On MLB Prospects. So where you want to go to learn about the stars of tomorrow, you'll follow Locked On MLB Prospects on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.